You are listening to Demystifying Organizations. In partnership with McGraw-Hill Education, I'm your host, Jeff Shatton.
My guest today is Jack Huffard. Jack is the president and CEO of Tenable Network Security, a $2 billion corporation that is one of the leading cybersecurity companies in the country. Jack co-founded Tenable in 2002. Before Tenable, Jack was the director of corporate development for Enterasys Networks. In 2013, he received the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award for Defense and Security.
I'd like to welcome to the podcast Jack Huffard. Jack, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is great. We're getting to do this in person. I almost always am doing these digitally, so it's nice to have you in the studio.
And a lot in person. There you go.
So every day there's a new headline that we see. Airbus recently got hacked. You can think of pretty much anytime you open up the news, you're going to see cities getting hacked, other companies getting hacked. So what is the status of the current cyber game when we think of the folks that are on defense versus these very sophisticated offensive players? What's the current status?
So it's becoming more well-known, but what's less well-known is that people have been focusing on the threat forever, when 98.8% of the breaches could have been avoided by just updating your network and making sure that the doors are closed and locked and the windows are closed. And that, figuratively, I'm talking about. But
sure,
if you go back and do the forensics on all the breaches that are happening, bad guys are coming through open doors and open windows.
So what would be an open door that you see people taking advantage of?
So Microsoft updates every month patches for their software. You should update every time.
Okay.
And I'm talking as a consumer. You should update every time they send you something out. Any software that you get from a vendor, you should update. That's where bad guys are looking. It's more of a...
So what do they do, though? So let's say I've gone a year without updating my Microsoft. I still have something that's from 2018. It's not from 1999.
Yep.
So what's an offensive player or a bad guy going to do about that?
So within the last year, there may be 30 known vulnerabilities with regard to updates between what happened last year and this year.
Okay.
And if you haven't updated in a year, you give the attacker 30 different ways in. Because a lot of these updates not only fix software, but they also create security blocks, if that makes any sense.
Because there's Microsoft will pay people if they find vulnerabilities, right? Or most of these companies will pay Apple. I know Apple does.
Bug bounties, yep.
Right. So they will pay hackers all over the globe to find vulnerabilities. Do those vulnerabilities then get published? Is it then known?
Well, so this is on the vulnerability management side. There's the way that we run our company and our research is that we do a lot of 0-day research, which means flaws that don't have fixes, and we go back to the vendors.
So clarify a little bit about 0-day. So 0-day, from my understanding, right? That's oftentimes it's created in the software itself. Isn't that's what Israel used to hack into the Syrian system?
0-day is a known flaw in a piece of software that doesn't have a patch yet.
Oh,
that's
okay.
what 0-day is.
Got it.
And so even though we do 0-day research, we work very closely with the vendors to make sure that when we issue a check for that vulnerability, that there's a fix for it. And that's the kind of the ethics of vulnerability management. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
You don't want to give a bad guy, hey, there's a known issue over there. Go fix it. And there's no fix.
But if one of these bounty hunters, if that's fair to call them, finds a vulnerability in an Apple code and then hands it over to Apple and says, I found it, please pay me my $5,000, $10,000 fee, they pay them. Does that then get publicized so that someone who's Apple fixes it, right? It's going to immediately get fixed.
Yep.
But people have not updated their software, maybe for the last year. Is that then out there in the open that there is this vulnerability that was found that has been fixed by Apple, but anybody who has not updated their software is just open season on?
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, we publish every vulnerability. So when Apple would come out with something like that, we would say, here's the vulnerability, here's the fix, here's when the fix was made. You know, like there's no excuse there. And on your laptop and on your phone, you should always enable automatic updates because there's no reason to have any lapse in the updates. And if you read them closely, if you open it up and say, this one has security and improvements to the map.
Yeah, I've never read the update.
You should read it. And next time, most of them have security updates.
Yeah. So is it a legislation issue? Because what's crazy to me is that most people, I mean, I can think of my wife, right? She just clicks, decline or update later. And I think that's the norm behavior. So on the one hand, you'd say, well, everybody should update it. But on the other, should there just be a legislation, which is phones get automatically updated for security breaches so that the behavior that we know is predictable, right? We know that there's going to be a huge chunk of the population that's just like my wife, that as soon as something pops up, she just wants it to go away, right? It pops up in her screen. She doesn't want to see it. She wants it to go away. The easiest way to make it go away is to not update.
How would you legislate that?
Oh, I don't know.
Is the government going to come back and tell your wife, oh, I'm sorry, you owe me $5 because you didn't update?
No. I mean that software automatically updates you for security, whether you like it or not.
It already does.
So then where are the holes coming in?
Because you own your device. You control what happens to that device. You can turn your updates on or off. So it's configurable. Yeah. I mean, that's the issue. And I think we're talking about the consumer side.
Yeah, no, I know. We'll get to the business side, yeah.
But when you talked about a business, it can, when a company like Microsoft puts out a patch, when you run 100,000 or 1 million different desktops or servers, that could cost you a couple $1 million to remediate, to push a patch out. So, people want to make sure that they understand what actually they're going to do, how is it going to disrupt their systems if they update them.
So most IT professionals and companies, that's why they're not updating. They don't want the disruption to their servers.
It's a lot of it is I would call laziness.
Okay.
I mean, like all of these updates should be there. It's just technologies are all over the place. I mean, if you look into a corporation, they're going to have Cisco and HP and Apple things. They're going to have television sets that sometimes may not even be patchable. Like there's so many assets they have to do. Putting that into a programmatic, systematic way has just evolved as a defined problem the board wants to solve. So you're starting to see companies take platforms like ours and turn around and say, okay, it's just not knowing the vulnerability is there. It's a people and process issue too.
So what does your company step in and do in the process?
We are just technology. So we are discovering it and we're telling you where it is on the network and what you should do. And then it's the rest of it is how do you get it into a remediation process, whether it's a patch, whether it's a configuration issue, whether you're putting a firewall rule up. It's really up to you how you want to run your network.
So maybe let's unpack this a little bit. There's a saying, and correct me if I botch this, but there's two types of companies. There's companies that have been hacked and the companies that don't know they've been hacked but have been hacked. Yes. More or less like that.
Right.
So how do you help discover if there's some intruder actively in the system?
So there are different ways. We have different sensors that we deploy. We talked about one today at the talk, Nessus, which is an active scanner where you give it a target and it sends packets out to that target and it asks it some questions and gets feedback. That's one way. You can do that.
So what is it ask? What is it asking? It seems really abstract to me.
Okay, so are your ports open? Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't be. But you're asking them different things. What software do you have installed? What versions of those software do you have? And then from that, you can understand if they've patched or they're back 3 revisions of a patch that should have been installed. The second way we do it is through network traffic. So let's just say somebody got on your laptop and you didn't know it. They call it malware. It just goes there, it's dormant. But at some point, it's going to kick off a process to go back to the command and control. Whatever deployed it wants the information off your laptop. And by watching network traffic, we can see things that we've never seen before coming off your laptop.
And how would you know that it's a bad actor and not me watching Netflix or doing, having increased use of my computer?
Because that would show up as normal activity.
Okay.
This would be abnormal activity. It would not have anything to do with Netflix or your.
So you're able to see. Well, how do you differentiate between? Because you can see everything that the computer's doing.
We can see when it's talking on the network, like when it's connected to the network, who it's communicating with, and we build trust relationships between things. When you talk about Target, that has been in the papers, they had connected inadvertently their HVAC systems to their point of sale systems. And so the people came in through the HVAC system and then made their way across the network to the point of sale, and then just left malware on the point of sale, and they were just skimming the credit cards off of that.
But they physically went into the HVAC system?
No.
Digitally went into their internet-connected HVAC system.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. And that's where, in this new world where we have cloud and we have on-prem things and you have IoT devices and you have DevOps going on, it's really difficult for a CEO to say, okay, are we secure or are we not? Or how secure? Like, what is our state? And guess what? It's a dynamic network. It's working all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's something that we're bringing a lot more visibility to it. And the visibility takes you a long way. Once you know about it, then you can start to do something.
All right, so somebody's in the network. So they made it in. It could be a foreign government. It could be some punks.
Yep.
What do you do once they're in?
So we can identify, through this network traffic that they are traversing the network. As a company, we don't do anything that makes any sense. Like, we're talking about discovery and assessment. We'll tell you, like, this thing is traversing and is going in an unpatched system. Or we talked about the intrusion detection systems, which are really focused on monitoring attacks. And so we can map the attacks that they're seeing to the systems they're going after and say, look, this attack is attacking a vulnerable system, and there's likely to be an exploit that can happen from doing this.
But can you defend against an attack? Like, for example, right, if you had stepped in, if Sony had called you when North Korea was in their systems and said, we're being attacked, what can you do?
We're not in that business.
Okay, so you're in the detection business.
So we talk about it as like a breach is a boom.
Mm-hmm.
So there's pre-boom and there's post-boom, right? And boom is getting hacked. We're all about the proactive running of your network and understanding everything that's there and what state it's in, and doing your best to run it in the most effective manner, right?
Got it.
But once you hit boom, then you're into forensic analysis and understanding where this guy came from. We have data that can be helpful to that, but where our value is well, you know what? If your doors are locked and closed and your windows are locked, a hacker's going to move on because there's so many other targets that are easy to get to.
So what could Sony have done once they were attacked? I know this isn't what you do, but once someone's in, is there something that companies can do to deal with it? Or are the keys, the intruder's already in the house, they're already taking the safe?
Now, like, I'm the business guy, I'm not the tech guy, so you're going down a path of technology that I probably, I'm going to claim ignorance on this, but having been in this world for 20 years, there are ways to change firewall rules, change routing rules that can quarantine like a breakout to a certain area. But once they're in, you've got to go reboot the systems. You've got to patch them. You've got to figure out what happened.
Turning to another subject, how do CEOs and executives view cybersecurity? Do they view it as a strategic necessity? Do they view it as just a nuisance? And then following up on that, how do they then allocate their spend based on that assessment?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to answer it in two ways. 10 years ago, it was a nuisance. It was just something that you had to do. I think people knew it was important, but it was a subset of IT, right? IT would take care of the security. Today, I think that Equifax was kind of the watershed moment for CEOs.
They're supposed to send me $125.
Yeah. Well, they, the board fired the CEO over it. And he claimed it was because an analyst didn't update the laptop.
Yeah.
That's what, I think that today it is absolutely strategic. It is, cyber risk has become business risk because every company is a technology company. They're running software or they're running some stuff in the cloud or they have mobile devices running around. But in order to deliver their product or service, they're using technology to do it. It's a technology-enabled world. So if you're a CEO and you're not paying attention to it, one, your company is severe risk, and two, you're not doing a standard of care that most boards would really want you to adhere to.
And are most CEOs on the same page now? Is this just standard practice?
Well, it's becoming standard practice, but you would be amazed at how many companies don't have a vulnerability management program to help them understand all of the assets and their state. They assess, they'll do a scan once a year and say, oh yeah, we're good. We assess every November. Well, guess what? Things change by the second. So if you're not doing it continuously and you don't have it as part of a program, and that's what we're doing. We have a whole set of professional services where we do a cyber exposure workshop. And we get together IT individuals and security individuals and then leadership. And we put them in a room. And we talk about, all the technologies that they're running inside their business. And what are they doing with those technologies? Are they delivering a car off an assembly line? Are they managing airplanes? What are they doing? And then help them understand that the cyber risk that they're under is not only the security guy's problem, but the IT guy's problem, and ultimately the CEO's problem.
Because it's got to be a huge educational challenge. Because I think of most CEOs who, unless they're the CEO of a technology company, in which case they spend thinking about technology all the time, their background is usually not in technology. And even if they have a ton of exposure to technology, as you said, right, every company is a technology company. The idea of how many different technologies they rely on is way below their pay grade in most of their decision making. So exactly what vendor does what, or what their what their email server is on, all these things are usually going to be way below the CEO. So is it just a massive education problem to get them on board and understand how a vulnerability of something that's maybe four levels below them is something that can literally rip up the company?
I think the education is done at the CEO level. I think Equifax did that education in one day. I think it's how CEOs build their teams, rearrange their teams to be more proactive about protecting the technology they use to run their business on. And I think that boards have said, you got the budget, go figure it out. And that's when you have to look at your team. You may have a CIO that has a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, below him. Do you want to pull that CISO up and make him equal with the CIO? The CISO is going to go to the audit meetings at the board because it's become part of the audit committee charter is to understand the cyber positioning of the company. And then I think on the latter part of it, it's got to become part of your policies and procedures. I mean, you got to come as a CEO and say, we're going to run at this level. And there's no excuses. I don't want to see patches that should have been done within 10 days done, 90 days later.
Right.
We're not going to run this, if it doesn't start from the top, it doesn't get done. From because all the time, people are like, don't touch that because, this thing has to keep going and keep churning out things. But it provides a lot of exposure to a company that I would say CEOs weren't aware of years ago, as well as they are today.
And so how does that affect the spend? So what was it, and maybe not even for your company, but for the cyberspace, what does that look like over the past 10 years?
So I would say in the Fortune 500, especially in the Fortune 50, they have really big budgets, if not unlimited, just because their brands are so important and their businesses are so broad. But as you go down, the other kind of size organizations, everybody competes for resources. You've got to innovate on one side, but you also have to protect on the other, right? And it's moving from more of a what I would call a threat-based view to a vulnerability-based view, because I think it's foundational to know your state in order before you make decisions. So I think that what we have done as a company was totally uncool, until recently. And now it's become the way that you should kind of start the process of understanding your exposure and then improving it over time.
What are the biggest challenges that you face as a leader of your company?
With regard internally or externally?
Mostly internally.
Internally?
Yeah.
I think every company struggles with awareness. I mean, you think about it. We have, I think the last time we talked about it, 1,200 employees, and that doesn't even touch these mega companies that have hundreds of thousands.
Sure.
But security awareness is kind of like your you set up the community watch people. Like people coming in your street and you call each other and all that stuff. I think that you've got to build the security awareness as part of the onboarding program, and then have other programs that go along. There's a lot of different ways that employees get, whether it's social engineering, whether it's phishing, whether it's other things like that, where it may be a very innocent thing that they think they're doing, and it's setting the company up to be really exposed.
So you've had a ton of growth in the past few years. I think you mentioned that it was 700 employees in the last year, or something crazy.
We've been adding a lot of employees, yes.
And then, so given the growth rate that you're experiencing, how do you manage culture?
So I think the key there, and I think most leaders would tell you that you can't build culture without a known set of values. And over time, we have had a lot of unwritten values that we now have written down and post on our walls and on our websites, and we really live them. When we are doing quarterly events with our employees, we give value awards away. If they've done the right thing for a customer, we want to grab that employee and make sure that people know that we're celebrating the culture that we've created.
Yeah, that's one of the best signaling practices, which is when you make an example of both positive and negative out of somebody. So you punish someone, it gets right. If they mess up, the word gets around that that's something that was value and congruent, and we don't allow that. And then you celebrate people who do things right, and then it's a signal to everybody else that this is something that we care about.
Yeah, I think the values too. The most expensive thing to do is do a bad recruiting job, right? And I think that if you are very clear about your culture and how people fit either in it or out of it, if you make the right hiring decisions, you escape a lot of the, I guess you would call it the bad side, like making somebody an example. and you're more celebrating things that happen well. And I'll just say we've been very good at identifying, the folks that are culture creators and curators, and folks that are culture killers. And
and how do you identify it?
It's just they end up being, they like to operate on an island. They're non-collaborative. They often are just not along the flow, and they end up having a negative aura around them that you can pick up on pretty quickly. And then it's just a conversation, and I don't think anybody likes to be part of a community that they are not liked.
So do you do a remediation path, or do you try and pretty quickly axe them?
You do a remediation path. I mean, you got them there in the first place, and there was some goodness, and what do sit down with them and coach them, and it may be that they're just having a hard time at home, and you just want to kind of get them through an issue. Yep. You don't want to worry about the home front, but there may be an underlying issue that you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And we care about our employees. We want to make sure that they're as happy as they can be, and I think that they're very, very seldom when you catch somebody red-handed that's with malfeasance.
Right, sure.
It's
usually more subtle.
It's a lot more subtle, and sometimes it has nothing to do with the business. It has everything to do with something going on in their lives. That as long as you get context, you can find a path to keeping them in the company. But if they're not a good fit, I would say move them as fast as you can.
I want to turn just our attention for our last subject about the broader context of cybersecurity in the United States. So one of the big concerns recently, and this is outside the scope most likely of your company, but one of the headlines recently has been about that Russia has access to our electricity grid. When we think of not just Russia, but foreign states intruding on our broader systems, how bad is the risk? How high is that risk? And then are there any things that you see being done to mitigate it?
So this is an area that's been underinvested in with regard to assets and exposure. And we touched on it earlier, but the operational technology, the systems that are running the power plants and the manufacturing plants and things like that, which historically were never connected to the network. They never got an IP address. They were running on old protocols that, they only did one thing and that's what it did. But as we've got into this new digital transformation and every company's like bringing to bear all this great new technology, they're adding in a lot of these OT technologies. And I think that you're going to see an investment from vendors like us and other vendors, as well as the customers, because their CEOs are now responsible for not only the IT network that they're running, but the OT network that they're responsible for too, because they're all becoming one. So I think you'll see a lot more just stories around it, news about it, and it's real. I mean, I think that maybe those stories are correct, maybe they're not.
What is the role of the government in terms of protecting our nation against bad actors from other countries?
So I think this is a really good question, and I think that Bush and Obama, put out some directives with regard to information sharing, and the fear that we have is that what is shared by DHS, potentially DOD, is unclassified, and that the real problems come when it's classified stuff that they're learning about, and that if people think that the government is going to give you the unclassified stuff and you're done, then you're raising your exposure, because there may be some stuff that, well, we know about, but because of the clearances that most companies don't have, they can't get access to that information. I think we ought to look at how the information sharing happens. And we've debated this for years. have the CISO have a clearance of a certain level where they can get a feed, if you're a public company, and understand not only the classified stuff but the unclassified, to make the best decision for the company, right?
But
But also to share back with DHS and DOD what has been seen out in the wild too.
I mean, it seems like it'd be a really difficult situation, right? Because they would have to simultaneously be allowing many more eyes onto classified information in order to protect pretty much everybody else. Is that the issue?
Well, I think the issue is it would be a push. They would maintain a database,
Uh-huh.
and then if you were running, Acme Corp, you would get pushed. Like, here's what we're seeing in the out in the wild. You should be concerned about.
And so what's the status right now?
That they do it, but it's not everything. There's probably a lot of what they call high side information that they know about that can't be.
I don't know what's high side.
So there's it's top secret stuff.
Okay. So right now, if the government recognizes a vulnerability, they will notify the company. They'll notify an American corporation.
Well, they have an information sharing facility at DHS.
Okay.
Companies can register to get that information. But what they do with it, And my point is that we don't want companies to think that that's where you stop.
Right.
It's just another set of information to use, but you're responsible for your network. And companies like us, companies like the firewall companies and other big cyber companies have a responsibility to make sure that they're doing the research and providing insights on what's happening outside too.
Can you tell me a little bit about cyber exposure?
Sure.
Program?
So we started Tenable back in 2002, and we were very focused on delivering the best result from when we discovered and assessed the system. And over time, we've developed this huge set of and an ability to identify 100,000 assets, all different types of software and everything like that. And what we're doing now is because of the advent of the cloud, we're able to use a lot of the post-processing in the cloud to bring business analytics to the knowledge that we have of the technical side. And we're driving what we believe is a whole new category of cyber called cyber exposure, where you're bringing to bear with machine learning and AI the ability to prioritize what needs to be fixed first so that you can lower your overall cyber risk and thus business risk to make your company safer. And today, if you talk to CEOs or CISOs, they'll say, that's a hugely manual process for us.
Got it.
That they get a lot of different buckets of information and they put it back into a database and they do all this. It's something that our world should do and is doing.
So you're able, through AI, you're able to automate a lot of the cyber risk. Or risk
identify it
assessment.
and say, okay, we know what's going on in the dark web outside your company. We know that there are exploits for this business. And we know you've got exploits. You've got those systems, so they're highly exploitable. So we're going to push those to the top. And you should fix these first, because 90% of the hacks are coming in right now, right here. And if you fix these, those doors and windows are closed, you're good. And I think that that's where CEOs need to get, because in a big company, it can cost money to remediate something. And if you're going to spend $1 million to do things, I'll give you an example. Microsoft came out, I guess, in the springtime with the Blue Keep vulnerability that was associated with a very old operating system, but it's still run a lot of places, especially in healthcare. And they said,
yeah, hospitals are always getting targeted.
Yeah, well, it's because they don't ever update their systems. And we had a CISO from a healthcare firm, and it was going to cost him, I don't know, $1 million to fix the issue on 20,000 things. And he talked to the CEO about it and said, this thing is serious. If a hacker was to get into here, then we'd be done. And so the CEO agreed to spend the $1 million to push the patches out. And I think that's kind of where CEO's been blind. And we're kind of turning the light on in the room and saying, okay, well, there's a desk here and a chair there. Why is this stuff in the room in the first place? And kind of cleaning up the networks. A lot of times people don't know what is internet facing and what is.
Sure. It's all seamless.
And that's just architecture. That's not a flaw. That's just where it is, right? And guess what a hacker's going to do? Oh my gosh, they have their TVs hooked right to the internet.
Yeah.
And that TV is connected to the conference line. And the conference line is back to Jeff's computer. But that'll take me 15 seconds to get Jeff's computer. And that's kind of what we're trying to help companies do, is just identify it all and then help them have a path through mediation.
Well, thanks so much for coming out to talk. This is an area that I feel like I've learned a ton just in our conversation and seeing you speak earlier today, even as someone who is, relatively knowledgeable about management and corporations. I mean, this is an area I am in the dark, aside from what's in the headlines.
Well, I appreciate you doing a podcast on it, because it's an important issue. And I do think that people out there are trying to get their arms around it. And there's some great people that are working really hard at it. And I think as a community, we've just got to continue to do it.
Well, it's an exciting space. Thanks so much.
And thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at jeffshatten1@gmail.com. You can tweet me at jeffshatten. If you like this podcast, press the subscribe button and make sure to rate it on iTunes so that other people can find it.